Please welcome Democratic presidential candidate Tom Steyer, accompanied by Esther Lee, Richard Louie, and Viet Nguyen.
Can we sit here?
Yep, that's where you go.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for a conversation with Tom Steyer. We're thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, what a morning.
Good morning.
What a morning.
Great to be in Southern California. I live in Northern California. It's great to be down here.
So, even as we're speaking, headlines are rolling out that you have qualified for the next debate, the October debate.
Yes, I did.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
How are you feeling?
You know, honestly, I'm very happy about it, and it's necessary to do. I started about 7 weeks ago, and they haven't run a poll in the states where I've been spending time for 5 weeks. So we were just waiting for someone to run a poll, which CBS News finally announced this morning. And we thought that if they did, I would qualify, and I did qualify. So I'm excited about it. But I think it's a long journey, you guys. And I'm incredibly excited about it. I'm not at all downhearted. It is really, really important and interesting. And I'm actually extremely energized, both by this, but I just came from New Hampshire, so traveling around the United States and learning what people think and see how they're different from Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Jose and the Valley and San Diego is really,
and New Hampshire
you learn stuff.
Was energized, certainly. At least on TV it looked that way. Let's bring you back down to our community, the API community, for a moment. Yep. And you might know this, one of the thematics is we like family, much like food, and we can talk about that later. Who in your family has influenced the way you see the world?
Okay. So I am aware that sometimes when I listen to myself being described in the press, it seems like my first name is Billionaire. And so I really like a chance to talk about my family. My mother was from Minnesota, and she taught in the public schools in New York City and in the Brooklyn House of Detention. My father, he and his brother and sister were the first generation of their family to go to college. He was a lawyer. He interrupted his law career to go into the Navy in World War II, and he prosecuted the Nazis at Nuremberg. There is a sense from them, but also from my brothers and from my wife, that the point of life is about doing the right thing, leaving things better, standing up for justice. And so, as someone who's, I look to my parents who are incredibly honest, hardworking, education-oriented, the kind of family that I thought everybody had when I was growing up.
Who's the most influential woman in your life?
My mom. Look, my mom, when she graduated from college, her father, who was a professor, a medical professor, told her, if you move to New York, I will never speak to you again. She moved to New York. She was when she was a journalist right out of college, she produced the NBC Evening News. She went to the head of NBC and said, I have 7 men working for me who get paid more than me. How's that possible? In like 1954. And he said, Marnie, they have families. It was just completely understood. The women in my life have always been extremely strong leaders and extremely strong in terms of value-driven choices in life. And my mom was one of them. My wife is one of them. My first 3 partners in business were all women.
Those of us who are parents know that it's a big challenge to pass on values to our children. It's always a challenge for everybody. But I'm sorry to bring it up, but as a billionaire, it must be an additional challenge as well. How do you, given the way you've described your family dynamic and how you've been raised and how you admire and respect your parents and their values, how do you transmit those values onto your own children when their situation is fundamentally different than how you grew up?
Well, when I was growing up, my parents had a very straightforward relationship with us about what was expected. They said, we expect you to study really hard in school. And in return, we'll make it possible for you to go to really great schools. And I went to really great schools. And they said, but when you graduate from your final school, you will not get 1 more cent from us. You are on your own. And I was completely fine with that, and I never inherited a penny from my parents. With my kids, I think a couple of things. The first thing I think about kids, I have 4 kids, 31, 29, 27, 25, and I was saying to Viet that my youngest kid goes to USC Medical School. And what I think about kids is they don't listen to what you say, but they watch you like a hawk. They're looking to see what you really, I don't think they even know they're doing it, but you look and see, do my parents tell the truth? Do they do the right thing? They ask me to do the right thing. Do they do the right thing? And so that was my attitude with my kids is they're going to watch me and see what my values are, and they're going to take those values. So actually, I don't think that the money has been a big deal in the sense that all of our kids have been serious about school, serious about work. We're serious about them being nice people. I honestly believe our 4 kids are really nice. They're all trying hard in their careers. I feel as if, a close family shows its values and transmits its values from generation to generation by how it behaves. And I feel as if, knock on wood, I think if you meet my kids, you will like me more. If you meet my wife, you will like me more. When I was first, I'll tell you one last story. When I was 18, I was going out with somebody, and my brother Jim said to me, "Why haven't you introduced her to our parents?" And I said, I just haven't gotten around to it. And he goes, "Our parents are the nicest thing about you, Tom. You have a lot better chance if she meets them."
Says a lot about you.
Normally, you spoke about your parents, and you spoke how they're a big inspiration to you, and how they kind of propelled this journey of yours. Normally, when we say our parents motivate us, the next step is not let's become the president of the United States. Let's do something right and change some things about this nation. So how did it go from I'm inspired by my parents, I want to do something right, to okay, mom and dad?
So let me say this. I don't know. I assume I'm speaking to mostly Californians. Is that true?
Is that true?
Okay, well,
mixed crowd.
So for Californians, you may know some of the things I've done. Look, I started a business in one room with no employees and no windows, and I built a pretty big multi-billion-dollar international business. Then my wife and I took the giving pledge to give our money away, and I started to organize for the last 10 years coalitions of Americans to take on unchecked corporate power. So the first public thing I did is I co-chaired the No on 23 campaign in 2010, which was 2 oil companies trying to roll back California's progressive energy legislation. I don't know if you guys remember, no one wanted the job of running that campaign because no one thought you could beat oil companies at the ballot box. We ran a completely different campaign. We got 70% of the vote. In 2012, I ran I conceived of, wrote, and ran something called Prop 39, which was close a corporate tax loophole for out-of-state corporations. It's $1 billion a year. We gave the money to the public schools. In 2016, I co-chaired with unions a $2 a pack cigarette tax to stop young people from smoking. It raises $3 to $4 billion a year. We gave it to Medi-Cal. No one thought we could beat the tobacco companies. They had won 17 times in a row before we took them on. People tried to do that for 17 times. We were successful in doing it. I've done clean energy props around the country, basically saying 50% clean energy by 2030 in purple states to prove that actually clean energy is something that the people of America want and will vote for, and we've done it. So it isn't like I just came to this. I've been doing this for 10 years. I also started one of the largest grassroots political organizations in the United States. It's called NextGen. In 2016, we registered 803,000 people in the state of California, specifically working with Asian American groups, by the way. We registered another 500,000 people outside California. In 2018, we did the largest youth voter mobilization in American history, where we took 38 Republican districts, organized them around youth, the turnout for people under 30 went from 18% in 2014 to 41% in 2018. That's the largest age cohort in America. It's the most diverse age cohort in America history. It's the most progressive, and they were voting less than 1 in 5 people. So actually the reason I'm running is I feel as if I have spent so long studying this problem and wondering why we have this broken federal government. And I think I have an answer. It's corporate money.
Tom, we love these fireside chats because we get to know each other. Shorter answer better.
Okay, Richard.
I'm a cable guy. That's what we do all the time. You got it, though, because you have so much to talk about. One of the things that is right in front of us that you have stood up in front of the microphones and in your advertisements very clearly about is this discussion and debate within your party specifically and outside the party certainly is the impeachment process and what will be decided come this week.
Right.
So on that very issue of whether it's good for the country or it's bad for the country and what you want to do, you've been pretty clear about what you want to do, but is it good for the country is what some of the critics, even within your own party, are asking.
Right. So I started the Need to Impeach movement. We've gathered more than 8 million signatures, and here's why I started it. Partly was to get the American people's voice into it, but I believe that when someone does something wrong, you have to stand up to them. And that if someone breaks the law who's rich and powerful, they have to be held to account. And I understand that it is something that is difficult and hard and could be contentious. I mean, I've read the criticisms too, Richard, just to be clear. But I believe that if you don't stand up to evil over time, then they win.
So then what do you want Jerry Nadler to do this coming week?
What I would like to have is a series of televised hearings to show the American people, to show the people sitting out there, the obstruction of justice, the corruption, the criminality of this president, so the American people can see it and decide, and so we can decide what to do. And I will say this, we've done a lot of research, and whether you're a Trump supporter or a Trump opposer, everybody says the same 3 things when they learn the evidence. I didn't know this. He's a liar and a cheat. If I did this, I'd be in jail. Everybody does, including Trump supporters. So all I'm trying to do is, look, my father prosecuted the Nazis at Nuremberg. When someone does something wrong, then the system is supposed to stand up for truth, justice, and the American way. That's all. And you can't figure out, I don't think you're supposed to figure out how it's going to turn out. You're supposed to stand up for what's right when the chips are down, and that's what we've been trying to do.
I have another question about wealth. I think you said I believe you said you're going to give away half of your wealth according to this giving pledge, which is fantastic. I congratulate you on that and congratulate all the billionaires who have pledged to do that. But that's a voluntary act on your part and on the part of these other people. What's the role of government in the management of inequality, wealth, extraordinary held wealth? Should we tax people like you more? How much should those taxes be? How can we redistribute that?
So let me say this. Yes, we should be taxing me more. I think that there's been a 40-year campaign to reduce the taxes on the richest Americans and on corporations that should be reversed. I actually proposed last October that we should have an asset-based tax on the top on people who have more than $30 million, 1% every year, as a way of redressing some of the inequality. But the other point about inequality, people talk about inequality. There's something besides taxes, and they have gone wrong, and I'd close all the loopholes and raise the rates. But the other thing that's gone wrong is working Americans haven't had a raise for 40 years. And my basic thesis, Richard, is that the corporations have bought our government. And the proof of it is that we have grown as a country for the last 40 years. Relative to other countries, I think we've done pretty darn well. But all the money has gone to the top. All of it. And so, to me, we're 40 years behind in terms of sharing the increased income of the United States in any kind of just or fair way. So when you talk about inequality, yes, there is a question of, I do believe we should have, no loopholes, higher rates, an asset-based tax. I also want people to make more money, because I think when people talk about the economy, so I mean, I was in the private sector for 30 years. Politicians love to talk about the economy in terms of jobs. We have 3.7% unemployment in the United States of America. When I was going to college, they taught me that frictional unemployment, like the lowest unemployment, is 4%. So we have a lot of jobs. The problem is you can't afford to live on the jobs that you get. And so it's a question of wages. It's a question of, can you afford health care? Can you afford, look, we're in California. Can you afford rent? Can you afford higher education? Those are the things that are just creaming Americans. We're employed. Unfortunately, we may have to have 2 jobs. If you look at the gig economy, I don't know how many of you guys, it's pretty well known, I think, in California, but I think they figured out Uber drivers make $5.50 an hour. And you cannot live doing that in Los Angeles, California.
How are you going to, so is it a higher minimum wage, or how are you going to get this wage increase to people?
Well, I think that there's a number of things, Viet. I do think we should have a higher minimum wage that reflects, the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation at all since 1970. But I think it's more than that. I think that there's been a 40-year campaign to take away the legal rights of working people. So part of it is to take away all the powers of organized labor so that people can't negotiate together as a group. You know, there are 26 right-to-work states in the United States of America, which make it really hard to organize. That's such a misnomer. A lot of people, as a function of their employment, give away their right to sue their employer for breaking the law in how they treat them. So there's been a 40-year campaign to basically get all of the power into the hands of employers and corporations. And so it's not going to be, there's going to be a lot of different things. I just think we have to get back to the idea that the Democratic Party is going to get up in the morning and work for working people, and they're going to do that until they go to bed. And they're going to fight their ass off. That's what I want to do. Look, we did 50 town halls on impeachment. I've been traveling this country for 7 years, full-time, talking to people about what they care about. Working people do not believe the Democratic Party fights for them.
So I'm thinking of the very electorate that you're addressing right now. I spoke with Bill, a truck driver in Howell, Michigan, about a month ago. And he does not feel, when he looks at many of those options he's got, that he has somebody that, hey, that's me. So, Tom, how are you, Bill, the truck driver in Howell, Michigan, and how are you going to address this separation, the gap? The gig economy, as you're saying, might be one of the issues to him.
So let me say this. For the last 10 years, what I've done is travel around this country and try to put together coalitions of ordinary American citizens to take on corporate power. That's why I was telling you about those props. That's what that was. Citizens fighting for our rights against corporations who wanted to squash us. And for 10 years, as an outsider, we've been winning.
Yeah.
So what I would say to that person is, look, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to organize American citizens to take back our government, our broken government, and get back to of, by, and for the people, for you. And if we don't break their power, we're not going to get the stuff we want.
But you get what I'm saying here, Tom. He might say, you got a couple dollars in your back pocket here, Mr. Steyer. You're not me. You haven't experienced what I've had to live through as a veteran, now as a truck driver, now potentially on disability. How are you like me, given that you can spend money to become a formidable candidate in this primary process? I don't see you.
Well, let me say this. I have traveled around this country and looked people in the eye. When we were doing those town halls, people said to me, you know, look, if they get rid of the ACA, I will die because I can't afford my medicine. I have had a chance to talk to people all around this country who have water that is killing their husbands, who have to decide whether to pay their child's medical bill or the rent. I've had a chance to go and understand from people what they're going through and actually spend the time with them. So my answer is, actually, I've been to Michigan and talked to those people. Have I been them? No. But as far as I'm concerned, the key point here is do you understand who they are? Do you understand from them what they're going through? And are you willing then to take that information and fight on their behalf? And I am.
Tom, you mentioned clean energy, and you have been one of the louder voices for climate change. And personally, one of the biggest proofs that you would like to be one with the Earth is you went camping on your honeymoon.
Yes.
That is just the greatest proof to me that this is something that you are concerned about. Why should we all be concerned about this, and why is this kind of a top issue that you've been kind of driving with?
So I really appreciate that question, Esther. Let me start by saying this. I have said as part of this campaign that I will declare a climate emergency on day one of my presidency. That we're in a place, I would give Congress 100 days to pass something like the Green New Deal, but they've had 28 years to pass something like the Green New Deal, and they haven't passed anything. We're in a place scientifically where we have to act, and not only do we have to take it as an emergency here, unless you're talking about a state of emergency, unless you're going to go to the communities and understand how it impacts the places that have basically had pollution thrust on them, poor communities, low-income communities, communities of color, you're going to get the wrong policy. That's my second point. And the third is, if you're not leading internationally, it's not going to happen. Anyone who thinks that we can solve this problem in the United States of America doesn't understand this problem. If you're not talking about, and if you think we can go to India and we can go to China and say, we want you to solve the climate problem, unless we're all in to solve the climate problem ourselves, then I think you're being completely unrealistic. Look, I think, if you listen to what I said about my parents, as an American, I believe every generation's job is to pass on a better world for their kids, a chance for them to have more opportunities, to have a more meaningful life, to have a safer life, to be able to go further. We are taking a very real risk of handing on a world that's unsustainable to our children, which would be unbearable for me. And so, I also can say as a business person, I've studied this for 14 years. I can tell you, we can do it and have cheaper energy. We can do it and have more jobs. We can do it and have better paid jobs. And we can do it and be healthier.
And Esther, part of your question, and excuse me, is part of, for instance, climate change. And if you talk to meteorologists, the issue of natural disasters. And California certainly has seen its set of natural disasters in recent decades. You're a Californian, you know this. We asked the other candidate the same question, and that is, okay, you are the president, President Steyer, there is a large hurricane, a Cat 5, making its way towards the East Coast. Sir, what would your first steps be as president based on the frequency of these natural disasters?
Well, let me just say that by the time a Category 5 hurricane is coming towards Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, all you can really do is try and get people out of harm's way, try and make sure that you have disaster preparedness there to help people who are in trouble, and that you're basically doing, care and maintenance and resilience in the face of a disaster. But by the time you have a series of Category 5 hurricanes coming towards Miami, in effect, you've blown it. There's a question here about preventing it, then there's a question about being ready for it, and then there's a question about what do you do by the time you haven't prepared for it and you're not fully ready for it. So when I think about this, Richard, to me the question is, yes, we have to be, when it comes, we have to be absolutely all in to help the people who are under threat. Absolutely. Then we have to be prepared beforehand, knowing that there are going to be fires in California now. There are going to be more and bigger hurricanes on the East Coast. There is going to be sea rise. It's science. We can predict it. But more than that, we have to use a little foresight and prevent the bad things from happening. And that's what I've been trying to do for 12 years. That's why I was fighting in 2010 to have progressive energy laws in California so that our kids wouldn't have to have as many hurricanes, that we wouldn't get to a place that was really unsustainable.
Mudslides, droughts, fires.
And the biggest thing, look, there's a huge thing about climate that people don't talk about much, and that is immigration and forced movement. You know, we had 5 million people move from Syria to Europe. They actually originally went into the cities in Syria because of a gigantic drought. Then there was political injustice, and then they fled the regime. When you look at Central America, they've had a huge drought before there was political unrest, and they fled the regime. People are talking, look, 2 of the countries in the world that are most exposed going forward are China and India. They're talking about 2 billion people having to move. Can you imagine the world if 2 billion people had to, didn't have a choice, but had to move? I don't know where they'd go, but I can tell you it would be chaos.
Speaking about our own situation then, and I'm speaking as a refugee and as someone who came here under U.S. refugee policy, and now we're looking at a moment where the Trump administration is making noise about eliminating all refugee quotas or even greatly reducing them. But there are many different kinds of categories of refugees, including the climate refugees that you're talking about. So we already have this crisis at the border. What are you going to do? Are you going to open the borders? Are you going to institute quotas? What would those quotas be? How are we going to address the situation?
In terms of asylum seekers, people fleeing violence for their safety, we've agreed to laws. Asylum seekers have rights. You had a right to come here. I mean, when people come, it goes to a judge and it has to be adjudicated, and we don't have nearly enough judges, and it takes way too long. But what Mr. Trump is doing is not only inhumane against the laws of humanity, it's also against the law. And so, look, in the history of the United States, when we look back, when desperate people are coming here because they're fleeing potential murder or some form of danger in their homeland, they have a legal right to do that, and we have a legal obligation to take them. And so it's not like having an open border at all. It's basically obeying the international law. You know, I view immigration, I think we tend to squash a whole lot of questions together about people coming here into one question. Look, we have 11 to 13 million people who've lived here for years or decades in some cases, who aren't documented, who live kind of in the shadows, don't have legal rights, and don't have a path to citizenship. That's a huge question that the Congress of the United States should solve and do an immigration reform and give those people legal status and a path to citizenship. And then there's a question about the people who are fleeing, or asylum seekers, and how we treat them humanely and legally. And then there's a question about how we need immigrants. The United States of America needs immigrants. We need to understand that. We don't have to open the borders. It's our country. We get to control the borders, but we should know we want people to come here. I know there are a lot of Asians coming to the United States, and that it's actually coming faster, more people coming and increasing. I think that's great. I think that's great for the United States of America, and I think it's great for those people. And so I think we've got to accept the fact that immigrants are bringing in all kinds of energy and positive work and the kinds of things that have made us, stronger for hundreds of years, and we should welcome that. We should control it. We should have rules. We don't have an open border, but that's the kind of thing. Getting great people from around the world, that's one of the secrets to why America's done great.
Well, for fun, what does... Tom, what does AAPI mean?
Asian American Pacific Islander.
Okay, that's always a starting point, right?
I was like, is this a trick question?
I have asked the question before, and presidential candidates have not been able to answer it.
Well, Richard, let me say this. I live in San Francisco, California.
Yeah.
It's like, one of the things that I always notice, and I always say this when I'm not with Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders, I always say, look, Asian Americans, those are some pretty big countries with pretty different cultures and histories. So I know that they kind of come from a joined landmass, but,
Describe the importance of the AAPI electorate.
So first of all, in California, it's huge. It is young. It is increasing due to immigration. In my mind, it has been a fantastic influence on this state for a bunch of reasons. I tend to think of Asian families as being really close. I consider that a huge boon. The reputation is that Asian families are really determined to work, that their kids be well educated. I consider that a gigantic boon. I know that in Lowell High School in my hometown of San Francisco, which is the magnet school, 83% Asian.
They kicked me out.
I told you it was a great school. I
you
told you it
surprised?
was a great school. Did you go to Lowell?
Yes, and they did kick me out.
But without teasing, I mean, I was talking, if you look at the UCs, they have a ton of Asian American kids. Great.
But I'm really interested in why you think the AAPI electorate is important to your candidacy nationally.
Well, let me say this. If you listen to the things that I care about, I want an America where everybody gets the chances that I want. And it's a two-way street. You know, we can't do this unless people get involved politically. We can't do the strong. My belief is the way that we grow as a country is that Americans succeed. So we invest in the American people, in each other. That's going to be our success. So if you want to look at a community that is working along those lines, like just let me get a good education and I will go to town. This is a community which has been a model citizen in this country. It's going to grow. Asian Americans, I don't know if you guys know this, but statistically, really big on climate, pollution, environment. This is a community which represents the values of America in a deep way. And so, from my standpoint, you know, this is a community that wants to live and is living the American dream.
It's also a community that's not homogenous.
And that's what I was saying. It's like you can't say China, India, Japan, Korea, Philippines, you know, Thailand, all were one thing. It's like,
So let's pick on one issue in which there is some division. You brought up education, Lowell, for example, so you're familiar with some of this idea that Asian Americans are supposed to be very good at education. One of the flashpoints now is affirmative action.
Understood.
The majority of Asian Americans support affirmative action, but there is still some who don't, and some of them are caught up now in anti-affirmative action lawsuits, for example, at Harvard.
I know that.
What's your stance on affirmative action? And should we continue it? Should we support it? Should we change it?
look, I think that there are communities in this country who have been severely disadvantaged and that everyone doesn't start in the same place. And I think when we think about letting people into schools, that you have to take into account where people are coming from, so that it's not if I come from a terrific educational background and here are my scores, and you come from a terrible educational background and here are your scores, they may not be comparable for what you've achieved and for what I've achieved. And I believe that. And I think that should be taken into account.
Yeah, before you and Richard answer some audience questions, I had a quick question I wanted to squeeze in.
Okay.
And the Asian AAPI voters are leaning more left, how they're voting, et cetera, how they identify, which party they identify with. But some studies indicate that religion is kind of the one factor that kind of still ignites that appeal to the GOP. You are religious. What would you say to these voters?
About me?
Or to convince them that the Democratic Party is the way to go in 2020?
Look, I think if you look at the difference between the two parties, it's a gigantic value difference, in all sincerity. I mean, I honestly believe the Republican Party has fallen off the table in terms of even trying to represent different kinds of Americans. I think this president specifically started by vilifying people on his very first trip down the escalator at Trump Tower. I think that he's someone who is specifically uses race to divide Americans. I think that his values are really, really bad. I think that he has supported racists, and I feel as if, honestly, I don't think that he's competent. So as far as I'm concerned, there is a lively discussion and a fair discussion between two parties in America. That's the moderate Democrats and the progressive Democrats. But I think I feel as if the Republicans have gone to a place, on climate, on gun control, on taxes, on coddling drug companies and health insurance companies. I think on immigration, I think they've gone to a place that is very, very radical. It's very, very un-American. And honestly, I think that they're doing a grave disservice to themselves and to everybody here. I really do.
Tom, let's head on down here. We're going to walk down to the right here, talk to some folks who might have some questions. Come on by if you'd like. Since we were talking about faith, my dad's a pastor. I'm very interested.
What denomination?
I can't tell you that. Come on now. But he'd want to know how you're going to bring faith into your administration. 30 seconds.
Well, let me say this. I do believe that everybody has an obligation to try and be part of what I think of as the positive life force in the universe. I choose to do it partly by going to church, but I believe everybody has a choice of how they do it. I don't believe there's any one religion that gets you there. If you say, I have friends who say, God, great outdoors. Okay, if you find God in the great outdoors, I love you for it. My mom, when she was dying, who was very religious, said, I find God more in music than I do in church. Okay, but we all have to believe that we're contributing to the positive life force in the best way we can. That's what I believe. You get your choice of how to do it, but you got to be part of that attempt to make this country better and this world better. And we're really on the brink, so it's really up to us to show up and do that.
Thank you for that. Now I can go home and talk to mom and dad. But if I didn't answer that question, it would have been tough. Come on over. What's your name? And get in the light so they can see you, too. What's your name? And where you
Hi, my name is Hazel Herring. I live in Los Angeles.
What's your first name?
Hazel.
Hazel. Nice to meet you.
Herring.
And we keep our questions fast and our answers fast so we talk to more folks.
Yes.
All right. So I heard you talk a little bit about increasing minimum wage, and you probably know in Los Angeles we've already voted on a $15 minimum wage. So on July 1st, I work minimum wage at a corporate retailer. And minimum wage went from $13.25 to $14.25, and I went from working about 40 hours a week to less than 20 hours a week. And this was something that happened to almost all of my coworkers too. And I can only imagine that that is harder for smaller businesses that are working, at the margin. And I wanted to know if you have a plan to address this.
Great. Thank you, Hazel.
Look, the issue for everybody on minimum wage is that somehow jobs are going to disappear. And specifically, people worry about it in retail. But actually, I do believe that we have an obligation that the jobs pay people enough to live on. 14 and a quarter in LA at $40 a week still isn't really a living wage. I know that. And so the question is going to be, should we be, what can we do to help the companies that can't survive on that is really the question. And to me, the question is, if you can't pay someone 14 and a quarter, if you have to go from 40 hours a week to 20 hours a week because the price went from 14 and a quarter to 13 and a quarter, wow, you have a troubled business, because every other retailer is paying the exact same wages per hour because it's now mandated. So the real issue you have is, why is it that that's driving you out of business? Because I'll say one last thing quick so Richard won't get mad at me. Normally, wages aren't the things that drive people out of business. It's an actual business model that isn't working, and that's what they blame. My experience is wages honestly have a lot more elasticity than owners like to say. That sounds like a troubled business, not a troubled way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hazel. Thank you so much. Come up to select.
Hey.
Nice to meet you, sir.
And what is your name and where you're from?
Ryan from Chicago.
Yep.
I came for Andrew Yang. I'm glad I stayed for dessert. How are you going to bridge the Democratic Party? I think there's two parties. There's the moderate and the extreme. How can you bridge those?
So that's a great question. Thank you. Look, I am a progressive. If you look at my policies, you'll see I am progressive. I am also a 30-year capitalist. I believe that the democracy is supposed to be run by the people, for the people. Period. And I believe that corporations have successfully bought that democracy. But I believe that the private enterprise system is how we get things done in this country, and I don't want to change that. I want the government to set the rules for how business works, period, not business set the rules for how government lets them work. So I believe as a progressive, I believe I automatically do, based on my background, put those two together, and I believe that I can take on Mr. Trump on the economy because he's a fake and a fraud and explain why that's true. And I believe that business people around the country, even though they know that I'm not going to let them keep doing the stuff they've been getting away with, will ultimately understand that I understand private sector is necessary.
How about on the social side?
I'm sorry, we got to. I know I'm going to get two more in.
Hi, Tom.
15 seconds. Where you're from? What's your question?
Louisa Blue. It's been a long time since
I
I've
know.
seen you, Tom.
Where you from?
Northern California.
What's your quick question? 15
So
seconds.
my question is, what are you going to do to change the labor laws to make sure that workers have rights to join a union without harassment, intimidation, and getting fired by
Okay, hold that
bosses?
question, Tom. You got two questions. You got to answer them both at the same time. Where you're from? Your name?
I'm from Irvine, and my name is Anupama.
And 15 seconds for your question.
So my question is that we are talking about, all the security within America, but what about all the danger that we are having with foreign countries, infiltrating our technologies and our security of the country? And I think that is
Cyber
huge.
warfare. Cyber
So
warfare.
how are you going to fix that?
Okay,
And
so
if you can do it in 60 seconds, then I know you got to
are
get
not
out
doing
of here.
union
Yes,
first?
please go ahead.
So let me say, on every one of the propositions that I've worked on, organized labor has been my first partner.
That's right.
They've been my best partner. I understand that we need to change a lot of laws. We have to give people the right to organize everywhere in the United States. And that is something that I will never walk away from organized labor. I believe that it's important for working people to be represented, and I would do everything I can to get rid of right to work laws and every other one of those laws. Period, the end. Promise. Cybersecurity. Look, we're in California. We know that the 21st century wars are not going to be like the 20th century wars or the 19th century wars. No one is going to come and shell Washington, D.C. from their gunboats, okay? But they are going to attack us through cybersecurity. We need to spend the money on it. We need to be prepared. The reason, and we need to hold people accountable. Look, this is warfare in the 21st century. Cyber warfare. We are behind where we should be. We're not spending the money we should be spending, and we should absolutely be dominating this. We're in California. We have the capability here to do all the things we need to do in terms of information technology. We're the leading information technology economy in the world right here in this state. We need to spend the money and hire the people to make sure that we actually have the advantage in cybersecurity that we have in airplanes, missiles, nuclear technology, gunboats.
Thank you all for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
And she even got a hug. How about that for a question? All right. Tom, we're going to walk you back up to the stage for your closing statements. Thank you for taking the questions from all those who came here today. Tom Steyer, ladies and gentlemen, with his closing message.
Ready?
Please.
So let me say this. I have said that I think we have two real challenges, and they're real, but they're simple. One is to break this corporate stranglehold on our government that I believe is basically broken the federal government, and we need to get back to government of, by, and for the people. And I believe I've been working on that for 10 years as an outsider and succeeding. The second thing is we need to stabilize the natural world. The climate threat is very real. We need to do it in the United States immediately. We need to lead the world to make it happen. But let me say this. Those are really straightforward but hard tasks. If we do that, those two things, we are in a better position than any people in the history of the planet. We can have a better guaranteed lifestyle in the United States for every citizen than any country has ever provided, ever. We can have guaranteed affordable health care for every American. We can talk, and I could talk at length about how to do it. We can guarantee quality education from pre-K through college for every American. We can guarantee a living wage, and we can guarantee clean air and clean water as a right for every American. We are rich enough to do this, We have more than enough money to do those things. We have the technology to do that. We have a political system that's broken. If we get rid of the corporate influence on our government, the corporate control of our government, we will get all those things because Americans want those things. And that's not broken down between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans want those things too. So when I think about what's going on in the United States this year, I feel as if we need to establish together what it is we're trying to do. Because Mr. Trump would never have gotten elected if people thought the Democratic Party was doing its job. You know, when I go around the United States, people do not understand what we stand for. We are working off a vision from Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. And we need to update that vision to the 21st century. But if we do that, let me say, as someone who is a grassroots organizer, who's built a big grassroots operation, we are going to have a gigantic, broad victory in 2020. I mean, we need to beat Mr. Trump. I understand that's job one. But that isn't nearly enough. You know, we are going to have to win across the board, and then we're going to have to put in some structural changes, including term limits in Congress. You know, if we had term limits in Congress, we would not be sitting here worried about Moscow Mitch McConnell. We would not be worried about Leningrad Lindsey Graham. We would basically, we are going to have to change this country the better. And this is going to be the election. This is going to be the election for our lifetime. And the way that, everyone says that a lot, but the way that I'll prove it to you is the turnout will be off the charts. They are going to show up like crazy. The question is, are we going to show up like crazy? The way that we win is by doing what NextGen America did in 2018, which is getting the 50% of Americans who don't vote to believe the system can work and matters. And if we do that and they show up, we will win across the board. And that's actually what we need to do. We need a mandate for change in this country from the people of this country. So I would say to you guys sitting in this audience, by definition, if you're here on a Sunday, you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be here. But what we're going to have to do is show up, meaning we're going to have to organize, we're going to have to be in our communities, we're going to have to do work, we're going to have to show up, we're going to have to turn out, which means we're going to have an absolute burst of awareness from Americans and a need to make a good choice, and then we're going to need to win big. And I guarantee you that we can do that. I am asking people to support me. I'm asking you to support me. I believe that if we do this, we will create a better America than anyone can imagine. I believe that we will put behind us the kind of divisiveness and hatred that Mr. Trump represents. And I believe we will go back to leading the world, not just economically, because we'll do that, not just technologically, because we'll do that, but also morally. This is a country that was built on a moral idea. It was very imperfect. We've come a long way. But actually, we need to go back to the idea of that in the United States, we stand for something. Our foreign relations stand for something. We are value-driven, and part of that value is accepting the full humanity of every other American. Thank you. Richard.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming out.
Esther, nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.